My name is Meg Bomke. I represent the Falmouth District and serve as chairman of the Board of Supervisors. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Bomke?
Here.
Mr. Cavalier?
Here.
Mr. Cohen?
Here.
Mr. Dudenheffer? Here. Mrs. Maurer? Here. Ms. Shelton? Here. Mr. Snellings?
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Giles. Welcome to everyone in the board chambers and also all of you watching at home. I hope you had a wonderful, happy Thanksgiving. Mr. Snellings, on behalf of the board and all the county employees, please accept our sincere condolences on the loss of your mother. You and your family are in all of our thoughts and prayers. She lived a wonderful, long life. May I have a motion and a second to approve the regular agenda? There are no additions or deletions. There is one handout regarding the final incentive agreement on item number 19 under new business.
And Madam Chair, did we
Yes.
not delete one item from the closed session?
Right, we can just amend that when we go into closed
Okay.
session.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve the agenda.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Thank you. That motion passes unanimously. Now we'll have presentations by the public. Please remain courteous and respectful to members of the audience and to the board. If you are here to speak about this evening's public hearing, please hold those comments until the 7 p.m. session. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes today. Speak slowly and clearly into the microphone and begin by stating your name and address. Please refer to the light on the podium to monitor your time. Green indicates the beginning of your remarks, yellow indicates you have 1 minute to summarize your comment, and red lets you know that your time is up. I do have 2 speaker cards today. The first one is Tim Haddix.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members of the board. I last spoke to the board on 7 November concerning unsafe road conditions on Decatur Road, at the end of which is my street, Sunset Drive. Since the last meeting, less than 3 weeks ago, I can give a small portion of what has been happening on Decatur Road. These comments and postings are in the words of my neighbors. All of my neighbors do not agree with the main problem is on Decatur Road, but we all agree there are problems that need to be solved, not patched. Decatur Road is a problem and everyone knows it. The aggravating factors that surround that make it even worse. Posted on 12 November to next door Widewater, and I paraphrase, this afternoon I was traveling down Decatur Road, Widewater area, when a tractor trailer came straight through a corner just before Potomac Winery. I was traveling 25 miles per hour and slammed on my brakes. I ended up in a very deep ditch with only one of my 6 wheels touching the ground. The empty logging truck never stopped even when I was blowing my horn. Stafford County Deputy Sheriff was on the scene with Widewater Fire and Rescue. A wonderful man and his wife in a tan Chevy Tahoe helped pull me out with 6 guys hanging on my door in hopes that I did not flip over. The Tahoe was able to pull my beast out. I have mud up more than half of my truck from where it was laid over. Thank you very much to the good, kind Samaritan who stopped to help, and the sheriff's deputy and the paramedics from Widewater Fire and Rescue who were able to somehow keep me calm. Feeling truly blessed. P.S. That road is not suitable for tractor trailers. They cannot make those curves without taking the entire oncoming lane. I know there's another road they can take. I hope this is heard by VDOT and can be addressed. I've reported this information to the police. That's a traffic incident. Posted 12 November 2018 to next door Widewater. As others would disagree with me, the road is not the issue. It's the junkyard, big rigs, wreckers, and rollbacks. The primary issue is the people not obeying the speed limit. The county is not going to do anything with Decatur Road, which I hope is false. They explained this at the town hall meeting. There's not enough traffic to warrant an improvement. The only maintenance and or improvements you are going to see on Decatur Road are the intermittent efforts by VDOT to clean the ditches, patch potholes, and the snow removal. This is historically what has been done, not only on Decatur Road, but all the roads in Widewater. And this goes to vehicle use and a general complaint, which I'm sure has been heard before. Posted 13 November 20 to next door Widewater. I noticed that the same blue truck going in and out of Aquia is always rocketing down the roads at 60 plus, even in the 25 zones. Very rude individual, cutting people off constantly and tailgating the person in front of them so close that if they braked hard for even a second, the truck would go through them. be careful on the roads out there. This goes to driver behavior. It's a law enforcement issue, we understand. Posted 15 November from one of my neighbors. I watched the county meeting video. I appreciated you quoting Aquia Harbor's GM, Ms. Patricia Harmon, stating one more car is one car too many for Decatur Road. I agree, but the over 1,000 cars on some days from Aquia Harbor using Decatur Road via their back gate should never have been approved until Decatur Road was improved. The traffic increased has become ridiculously dangerous for such a small rural area.
Could you please summarize your
Obviously, I'm
comments?
over my time. There's much more that I could say, but I would just say in closing, if you'll just spare me a moment, I encourage you, when you're making your decisions, to not deprioritize Decatur Road once again, because it has been done so in the past. Keep it up where it is and keep pushing it up
Okay.
in your agenda. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. All right, our next speaker is Patricia Kerpel. Or is it Kerpel? Kerpel, okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, board members, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Patricia Kerpel. I live at 38 Dobie Point Road in the Accokeek Creek watershed. And today I'm here to address some comments to item 14 and item 18. Item 14 is the return of the Safeco bond money, which we received and was to be used for water and sewer and roads in the Crow's Nest Harbor. I see that that is being returned to Safeco, and it looks like the lawsuits associated with those funds are also being extinguished. And I'd like to know what is the reason for that extinguishment? What kind of consideration is going to those developers? Then on item number 18, that is new business, and it looks at establishing new maps for cluster development. And speaking to the map for the Aquia District, it looks to me like there are some lots. I'm particularly concerned about the road that runs from the Brook Rail Station down to Marlboro Point Road. It's a 3-mile stretch that goes through a wooded wetland. It looks like some of the lots on the north side of Brook Road and also on the north side of Raven Road that are included in that map will contribute water to the Accokeek Creek watershed. I hope someone has addressed you about the issues on that segment of Brook Road. About a week ago, I came through and there were 15 streams running across Brook Road. I've spent 3 nights at hotels myself because I was unable to get home due to high water. So I think it's inappropriate to schedule any more potential development. I know that homes can be built by right, but to schedule any more potential development in that area of the Accokeek Creek watershed. So I'm hoping that your planning commission or you will address removing those lots. Also, as regards the Crow's Nest lots in that area, I think that that this is just sort of an invitation for development, putting them in a cluster development area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, those are the only speaker cards I have. Is there anybody on the right side of the chambers that would like to address the board? If so, please come forward. Okay, seeing none, is anybody on the left that would like to address the board? Please come forward. Are you going to?
Next week. Patricia, how are you? All right, the newspaper's here. Paul Waldowski, 8 Pickett Lane in the gerrymandered Rock Hill District. Next meeting, I invite you all. I'll be the Grinch. I'll be handing out my annual Christmas present to the selected chairman and the other board members. Thank goodness we're going to have a new selected chairman next year. Now, I heard that term issue again, and remember, law enforcement has opportunities, not issues. The sheriff's name is Decatur. Just tell him to get rid of those empty sheriff cars and put them on Decatur on bookends, and maybe you'll get something solved. but I only have solutions. I don't have issues. On my way here, I saw potholes at 220 and 325 Courthouse, which I will report to VDOT, who's done a very good job. I was on Eagle Road where there's 4 potholes, so I took care of those. And like I've said at other meetings, you know, when I'm gone, you can issue me a proclamation for my great citizen duty. Let me bring you up to date on that great development on Shelton Shop Road. Those of you who don't know about the 95 houses, it's been great wetlands, and it's been great to watch a developer really scramble because we brought up all the easements, and for $400,000, you can get a great piece of property that I guarantee you will get ponding on, and you'll have stormwater issues, so you'll have no problems. So get out there and buy some property so we can get some more taxes. Yesterday, I was meeting with my attorney in Fairfax County, and I was surprised that the tax there is only 6%. And they have all these amenities, and I know they have a greater population because we only have 268 square miles minus 55, but we have this outrageous 9% tax rate. And yet our school systems are it's just amazing. You're collecting all that revenue from them churches, just moving in and using up our space and all our utilities. Just wonderful. Also, I'm actively involved in the gerrymandering committee. So we're looking real hard. Remember, we get rid of 2 of you, 2-year planning commissioners, 2 school board members. That's $384,000 in 4 years. Buys a lot of school buses.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the board?
Good evening. My name is Cecilia Kirkman. I reside at 447 Raven Road in the Aquia District and on the Crow's Nest Peninsula. Supervisors Duden, Heffer, Snellings, and Cavalier, it's like deja vu. Here we are, still 17 years later. I have to say I was pretty surprised to see item number 14 on the agenda. I guess the value of following an issue for years is I have boxes and boxes of paper, including a written opinion from a former attorney for the county who opined that the Safeco agreement could not be amended. So I was a little surprised to see that on the agenda, but more importantly, I'm concerned about the failure to include small individual owners, such as myself, who owns a property contiguous to the Crow's Nest Harbor, or Ms. Kerpeel, who owns a lot in the Crow's Nest Harbor, have been excluded from these discussions. Really, when we bought our property, we did our due diligence, we looked at court records, we came to planning, we made our decisions based on relying upon those things, and we do have a stake in what happens regarding roads and sewers on the Crow's Nest Harbor. So I was surprised that this seems to be happening without including people who are affected by it. I also want to speak to item number 18, the cluster subdivision. I urge you all to consider sending this back to the Planning Commission for a lot more work. It is a cluster. I really can't understand the thinking of putting cluster subdivisions on the Crow's Nest Peninsula, setting aside the environmental concerns. That's an area where the supervisors have already spent tens of millions of dollars to move acreage into the Crow's Nest Natural Area Preserve. The reason why it's a preserve and not a park is that the emphasis is on the natural and historical resources and its conservation value rather than a park where the emphasis is on recreational uses. And any development, particularly dense development that you find in the cluster subdivisions, is going to be inappropriate for that area. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the board?
Kevin Hago, 1 Drummers Cove. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I got here late, so I don't have an agenda, but I'm hoping that internet access for Marlboro Point and CGI Communications is an item that you're going to be discussing. As someone that works out of the home part-time when my wife is not working out of the home, and someone with small children, we are absolutely at a competitive disadvantage, especially our children. They just don't have the same access to online materials, the ability to look things up. So I would encourage the committee to address that, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the board? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to bring it back to the board. Next are reports by board members. And don't forget, if you wish to pull an item from the consent agenda, please do so during your report.
Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Ms. Giles. Several things, just it's been a busy, basically, month. I attended a Healthy Generations meeting, in which I serve on that committee, and there's a lot going on with that committee and its organization of the, basically, the RAA board. I also attended a community meeting at Potomac Creek Estates with the HOA as well as the fire personnel. Back in February, the residents contacted me and we contacted the fire chief and we worked with them. They wanted to see what they could do to make their residents and their subdivision better for our fire and rescue personnel as far as coming in and doing what they needed to do to help them, which was a very proactive and excellent action on their part. So we had, after the fire department and rescue had worked on this for a while, they had a meeting with the HOA, and I just wanted to commend our fire staff for the work they did and the residents. One of the things they pointed out was that a fence was too close to the driveway, and the resident raised their hand and said, what do I need to make that better? And it was just a great spirit of community. And it's something I think a lot of other communities may want to think about what they can do to make things better for our fire and rescue. Speaking of rescue, I spent my Black Friday on a ride-along with Medic 11 out of Falmouth with Master Tech Rue and Technician Felix, and got to see our men and women in action. And everybody that we dealt with, either themselves or their family members, commended our fire and rescue personnel for what they do. And it was a really great experience, and it helps, especially on Black Friday, get to see that aspect of it rather than just fighting in the malls. Lastly, I attended a ribbon cutting for a bocce ball court at the Rouser Center. One of my students, as his Eagle project, Stephen Dean, had that. Built it there for them so that the seniors in particular could take part in that sport, and he did a terrific job. And then afterwards, there was his Eagle ceremony. And I want to thank Mr. Snellings. Mr. Snellings graciously allowed me to go and do that since I teach Mr. Dean. And so it was a great experience to be there at his Eagle ceremony. And a great amount of praise to Mrs. Dean, who has raised 2 young men who both earned their Eagle Scout Awards. Quite an accomplishment in this day and age. So that concludes my report.
Mr. Dudenheffer.
I'm just finishing up my 7th year on the, not 17 years, so I need more experience. I'd be up there with Mr. Snellings. So I just wish everyone had a happy Thanksgiving. It's really difficult, I think, in this day and age to, if you turn your television on, some of the anxieties and the stress and the information that's being thrown out there, you never know if we're going to have a nuclear war or we're going to be inundated with floods and hurricanes, I mean, from day to day. So I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving. We're entering Christmas holidays. I hope everyone will drive safely and have a great holiday as we go forward. So, Madam Chairman, I'd like to pull item number 8 just to highlight the good deeds that are happening there, and that concludes my report.
Mrs. Mauer.
Couple of things. First, attended the CPMT meeting, and that's where we deal with a lot of the CSA issues. I mentioned this to the board earlier, but I think it's important for the public as well, that a lot of the special schools that we send children to, they run about $70,000 per child, and we've been seeing increases in costs year over year to the tune of, having $1 million budget deficits every year. Well, it appears that the General Assembly has heard our pleas for help, and they have instituted, for now, a 2% cap on the increases in costs, so that's good news, and that was highlighted at CPMT. Also attended the VRE meeting, and there is...
What is CPMT?
Oh, gosh, Community Planning, what does that stand for?
Community Policy and Management Team.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's in conjunction with the schools and a lot of our mental health professionals, and we adjudicate cases for children who need assignment to special schools.
Thank you.
So, sorry, I didn't know what the acronym is. Also attended the VRE meeting, nothing much to report there. But the thing that I did the last 2 weeks that was the most exciting was I attended the all-county debate. And I've said previously that I was a debater both in high school and college, had a small college scholarship for the debate team, and so this is where I get to go and geek out. And I want to thank Mr. Long over there at A.G. Wright Middle School, because he allowed me, and I would say allowed because I begged and pleaded, to help coach the A.G. Wright kids for 2 days. And I will say, in the 3 years that I have been on this board, that 2 days was probably the best 2 days I've ever spent. And those kids are intelligent, they're motivated and well-spoken, and all of the kids, quite frankly, in the debate program across Stafford County Public Schools are extremely talented. And judging the competition, by the way, I didn't judge any of the kids that I helped coach. I want to be clear about that fact.
But guess who won?
I am proud to say that all 4 teams at A.G. Wright Middle School did win their debates that day, and I want to congratulate A.G. Wright. I want to congratulate Mr. Long, and I want to express my gratitude to Mr. Long for continuously allowing several of the members of my board, several of my colleagues have participated in this with me, and for a lot longer than me, quite frankly, in judging the pre-debate tournament that he hosted at A.G. Wright Middle School, and so just wanted to say congratulations and thank you and highlight those kids across Stafford County. And finally, Madam Chair, I want to pull item number 11, and specifically because we had our numbering crossed last time, it is the Virginia Telecommunications grant to extend broadband service.
Okay.
Ms. Shelton?
Well, I had a great time at the debate, but I just don't think it was as good as yours, man. We didn't win. And so, but I didn't coach anyone. I got to judge, but it was a really lovely time. I wanted to mention about the OPEB Trust. If you're a Stafford County employee, this is the trust fund that we have that provides our pensions. We had our annual meeting. By the way, our Ms. Laura Rudy retained her position on the Board of Trustees, yay, which goes along with our AAA rating. But what was really important about it was we now have 5 new participants in that trust, which was $957 million, and now it's up over $1 billion. And why that's important is because that distributes the risk among lots of people, and it keeps our rates really low. And one of the things I did ask, by the way, is like, how does our pension fund compare to the federal government? I really think we're probably doing better. Can't wait to tell you that. Second thing, well, before I get into the fun things, on item number 14 is not related to the individual lots, and this is on Crow's Nest. And so if you guys want to talk about it, planning and zoning for each individual lot, they'll be glad to talk to you. And if you want, let me know. We can have them show up at the next roundtable and have a discussion about that. But what we're doing today on item number 14 is not related. The fun thing that I got to do was an eagle. We have one of our own, Aaron Half. His mom works here in Stafford County. I had the pleasure of attending his eagle ceremony. It was just really, really great. And I think that's all my comments. Thank you.
Mr. Snellings?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Just very quick, I got a little confused by one of the speakers who said our tax rate was 9% versus tax rate in Fairfax of 6%. We don't set tax rates by percentage in Virginia, at least at the county level. Tax rate in Stafford County is 99 cents per $100 valued. The tax rate in Fairfax is $1.27 per tax rate, $100 value. So we're well below Fairfax. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Cavalier?
Thank you, Cheryl. One of the things I had the honor of doing this last time was making a presentation with Governor Northam at the Widewater State Park, which just opened, and it is the 38th state park in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It is not a preserve like Crow's Nest, so it doesn't count in that number. So it is our one and only state park in the county. And there were a lot of dignitaries there. Ms. Bonke was there from the board. And so we hope that this is going to be a wonderful success and offer public access to waterways that are right now very limited in Stafford County. So I think as long as funding continues there, we'll be in good shape. The another item is at the VACO conference, and Ms. Baumke was there at moderating the school safety session, which was new this year. First time we've ever addressed that, and that's in light of a lot of the tragedies we've had, and we've recently implemented a task force here in the county where the sheriff has a pilot program that we adopted that puts deputies and school resource, we call them school protection officers, in elementary schools, and we have 2 currently with a 3rd to be named. And I think this is going to be a successful program, but we did have a chance to talk to the delegate who heads the select committee for the General Assembly on this issue, and we're going to get some workarounds with the retirement system that will allow retired officers that are fully trained and certified to come back and serve in that capacity in elementary schools. Therefore, they're more of a part-time employee, but because of restrictions under the retirement system, they're not allowed to work that many hours. So we're seeking a waiver basically for that, to allow these people to come back for that purpose only, and hopeful that we have enough support statewide to make this happen. So stay tuned on this venture. And the one last thing was the meeting that I attended with Miss Shelton down there, Cindy, on broadband. And I was initially very skeptical about the broadband initiative that we're having here for the county, because I've been to a lot of statewide meetings on it, and the governor has a plan, and the federal government doesn't really have a plan, so we're kind of left to our own devices here. And the gentleman who came up to speak about the lack of internet service in Marlboro Point area, certainly we have that in other parts of the county, certainly in Widewater, certainly in Hartwood, as well as Rock Hill. And so the grant that we're applying for in this upcoming session here, well, actually before the session, will enable us to put in a program much like King George County did, and it seems to work very well, and the cost is very, very low. So for a $300 and something thousand grant, the state's picking up the 80% of that anyhow. So our cost county-wide is really negligible, and it will allow access for many, many families who are very limited in what they can get right now, and it will have very good speeds comparable to what you get with your current packages and Verizon and Comcast. So, and the rates are very affordable. So I think this is going to be a really good project. And you know what, even if we don't get this grant, because you're never guaranteed, but I think we as a county should take the step forward to increase the broadband in our county regardless, and make that leap and do it in all the rural areas that we have in Stafford County, because there are a lot of places that, people just can't get it. And the big companies, the Verizons and the Comcast, just aren't going to foot the bill to run the lines out to these places. So this is a good alternative, and we'll hear about it more later. It's been pulled from the consent agenda, apparently. So anyways, I support it 100%, and I'm very impressed with the company and what they've presented us. Thank you.
Ms. Bumpke.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to echo what Supervisor Cavalier said regarding the Widewater State Park. Since I represent the Falmouth District, I'm down up against the river. And I mean, it was a good 25 minutes from here at the courthouse. But at a minimum, if you're not going to go out there anytime soon, you need to at least Google it and look at the facility that they have built out there. It's great. And definitely make some plans next spring and summer to go out to the park. One thing the governor was talking about was just everybody getting removed from all their electronic devices and just going outside and being with old Mother Earth. Do something that's very simple. It's very soothing and good for all of our mental health. Congratulations to Ryan Anderson, who from Troop 199, who received his Eagle Scout Award this past Saturday. He built shelves in his church because they just had a big room where they threw everything in there, and so he made it very. He organized everything for them and built these shelves. It was really a great project. And I just have to say, all four of his grandparents were there, and he made a comment about each one, about how they affected his life. And it was just really neat. I appreciate hearing from young people now that I'm a little older. Last night we had a GWRC meeting, that's the George Washington Regional Commission, and we had a presentation on housing and how expensive everything is getting from Northern Virginia all the way down, and how do we come up with housing that's maybe more cost effective for our teachers, firefighters, and policemen. So more to come on that. We also had a presentation on the George Washington Ride Connect, which is a big program all about carpooling, van pooling, and we help people get connected to regional vans and carpools to moving north primarily. FAMPO, the Fredericksburg Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, we have our upcoming policy meeting on December 10th. One of the big reasons that we've scheduled a meeting that early is because we're going to be going over our smart scale applications, which are the projects that we are looking for help from the state of Virginia, where we're putting together the money that we have at this level, and we're asking for state match on some transportation projects. I attended the VACO annual meeting, as Mr. Cavalier said, and a lot of great discussion on school safety. We are way ahead of what a lot of school divisions are doing in the Commonwealth of Virginia, so it was very nice to share that information with them and what our Sheriff's Department has had a lot of success with in improving safety in all of our schools. And I attended the Big Brothers Big Sisters annual breakfast, and I've never been a big sister, but it's something I'd like to do in years in the future when I'm, don't have anything else to do. I think it would be a great, something really neat to participate in. You can tell from the little sister that spoke about the impact that the woman had had on her over the years, just brought tears to all of our eyes. And that's a friendship that'll be there for life. So if you have time to dedicate to something like that, I know that Big Brothers Big Sisters could use your help. And I did attend the Gale debates as well. And I just have to tell you, the kids are so nervous when they come in the room. So after it was all over, I asked one set of girls, are you glad it's over? Oh my gosh, they said, I haven't slept for 3 nights. I've been so nervous about this debate. So something that might come so naturally to us, was very challenging for them to get up and speak and debate with their colleagues. So that's always a great experience, to get out of what we do every day here in county life and go into the schools and see what's going on there. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention that I attended and I gave Cindy and Wendy the Women's Entrepreneurship Day Summit a week and a half ago, and Mary Catherine Greenlaw, the mayor in the city, was the keynote speaker, and she just talked about the influence of women. Actually, a lot of women in Stafford County had, you know, back in the 1800s. So it was a great event, so I put that on your desk if you'd like to consider that next year. So with that, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda minus item number 8 and number 11?
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes unanimously. Item number 8, I believe, Ms. Maurer?
No,
That was
me.
Mr. Dudenheffer. Sorry.
There's no need to get an explanation. I just wanted to highlight the fact that we're going to start a test program for a route of the Fred bus to go from the Stafford Borough lot in North Stafford. Will make its way with several stops along the way and on the Marine Corps base, but go to the VRE stop at Quantico. I hope anyone that can use that would certainly do it. Every car that comes off the road is something that is a good thing for the rest of everyone else. And again, it's a test. If we don't get ridership, we won't do it for very long. So I'm asking everyone who's interested to please try it out. Thanks. I move for proposed resolution
R18-285.
R18-285.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any discussion? Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes unanimously. Item number 11, Mrs. Maurer.
Yes, Madam Chair. You know, I have a few questions on this, but so I don't know if I'm going to address those questions to Mr. Foley or Mr. Presley. But first, I want to congratulate Ms. Shelton. You've done a significant amount of work, and whenever you're new on the board, there's always that one issue that's really challenging your community, and I know broadband is challenging your community. You've done a significant amount of research on this topic, and so I know I pulled the item from the agenda, but it's not to stop it. I just have a few questions, and but I do want to take this opportunity to congratulate you for the significant amount of work and research that you've done on this, and I hope that this is just the beginning of moving more broadband into other areas of the community. I know that Mr. Snellings and I also have issues within our own districts as well as does Mr. Cohen. But Mr. Foley, who am I going to address? Mr. Cannon. I'm also going to have you make the motion because it is in your district and it's your project. So I'm not going to make the motion. Okay. Mr. Cannon, and I know you're relatively new from an IT perspective, and so this might be a historical question that's going to require some research on it. However, it doesn't impact actually submitting the grant, so I want to make that very clear. Back in 2006 through 2009, we did some reimbursements. We recently got some reimbursement information regarding a former supervisor, and it looks like we did roughly about $10,000 in reimbursements between 2006 and 2009, and a significant portion of those reimbursements were for internet access, and that supervisor used to live in Marlboro Point. I'm wondering if there's any infrastructure that has been installed, that we can leverage, and I understand that this is old, and it was brought to my attention by another supervisor, quite frankly, but what I don't want to do is miss an opportunity to leverage potentially some infrastructure that's been installed out there that we, Stafford County, have invested in. Are you familiar with this at all?
I'm not, but we can look into it.
Okay, and the other reason this is important is I know that there's a matching amount, and I'm just wondering if any of this, money that we've already invested could be applied towards that matching.
Well, the match is not something that the county is committing to. It's actually the co-applicant will be contributing money. So we've talked about helping the co-applicant with speeding up the permitting process and some other things
Okay.
that could streamline the deployment of it, but that's, so far, there's no specific county dollars allocated or proposed in this.
So what I am interested in, and I hope I can get some information back from you later, not stopping this particular grant application, is if we, Stafford County, have invested in internet access out there, and if there's, might be some infrastructure available to the residents, and, you know, what that approximately $10,000 was used for. And one final question, and this might be a little bit more heated, but I also noticed that we were sending reimbursements to a former supervisor's private company, and I'd like an explanation on that as well, all related to this internet access.
Madam
Okay.
Chair, those two items are also under review by our finance department, so we will be able to work with Mr. Cannon in particular about whether the infrastructure that may be in place could also support the project that you all are considering right now. So we'll work together as staff on that.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry to spring this on you. We just got this information recently.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Shelton.
Madam Chairman, if I know the answer to those questions, can I answer? I will tell you what infrastructure we do have in Marlboro Point related to it. If you are on the water side, then you have the opportunity to use some hotspots, and they can come in from Maryland or other places, so you can use your cell phone service if you have it, to use hotspots. And then, I'm sorry, I ate a peanut, shouldn't have done that. The next thing is,
Is that the infrastructure that we installed related to
The
this
other one-
10,000?
the other, it could be that, but it could also be that for people that were longer term in Marlboro Point, they used to be able to provide copper service. Sometimes that's being disconnected as the houses sell. So down areas of Marlboro Point, there is definitely copper lines, so you can use DSL.
Okay.
Okay, I don't like DSL for internet, sorry, but yeah, there was a time.
Yeah. If we can just get clarification on what the county's,
Turn your mic on, please.
my mic is on.
Oh, okay.
If we can just get clarification on what the county reimbursed for, that would be helpful.
Okay, do I have a motion, Ms.
And
Shelton?
Madam Chairman,
Oh.
I have another question before Ms. Shelton makes the motion,
Okay.
please. And this is for both Ms. Shelton and Mike and the KGI representative that were all there at the meeting. We had talked about putting a tower at the Whitewater State Park property right there. That was on the map that you showed me.
Yeah, that map was an error that we showed you. That was an idea our GIS folks had taken to think about what could potentially happen in the future, but that's not part of the grant itself and their proposal. But
Right.
that's something we can certainly investigate outside of the, this grant.
Right, and I thought we had talked about that the cost to actually install that, and if you would come up, ma'am, that particular antenna tower on that location, if the state gives us permission to, and I know in fact, that they would love to have that because they don't have internet access at Whitewater State Park for the rangers. So, I believe the General Juan told me that it would be an additional $35,000 to install that particular antenna.
You're talking about just one for Widewater.
I mean, the
You're
one that
talking
would
about-
connect across, basically. We have in this plan, the current plan
But
to
it's not
install
in
the
this,
antenna.
it's not in this proposal, because that was, remember, spoken about after, when we talked about it in the second meeting. So it's not in this proposal, but it's not something that can't be done, it's just not in the proposal
But
for the VATI grant.
But I thought we discussed about adding it to this
Oh,
one.
you did,
For,
but-
for an additional $35,000 to do that. In fact, and basically what I'm getting at is, in the end, to amend this proposal to include that antenna, okay, which would increase the coverage on the other side of the water right there, for an additional $35,000 and incorporate that into this particular grant application would increase the 20% grant to $7,000, by $7,000. Is that possible at this point?
I'm not sure, is it too late?
I think it does add a lot of complication in terms of getting approval from the state, and it would present another potential obstacle, but, I mean, it's something we can include if that's the will of the board.
Well, I don't see this as an obstacle in getting this grant from the state, because we would be helping out the state by providing internet access to the park right there,
I
so.
mean, we could enter into some conversations with them and see if that is something they would be amenable to, I think.
Yeah, I thought we were going to do that
yeah.
before this meeting, so
Yeah,
I'm a bit confused today.
Yeah, okay.
So what I'd like to do is if we could just increase the amount from 300 to 335 as a not-to-exceed amount, and if you can make this happen with the Whitewater State Park people and get the state buy-in to this, that money could be part of this grant versus just leaving it out and doing it at another time.
Yeah.
Is that,
That seems reasonable.
are you fine with that, ma'am?
That's fine. I remember Juan talking about it, so, I mean, that's fine. I just didn't know if it was too late for the grant.
Yeah, I mean, Juan told me that this
Right.
was,
That's
doable.
easy.
Yeah.
Right, it's just,
It's just putting in the monopole right there,
Mm-hmm.
and we can make the monopole look like a tree, so
Right.
it fits into the park setting right there. It's right on the banks, shores of the creek. So I think it would be a good addition, and I think it would greatly help our cause in getting the grant approved by the state, because it's helping them out.
Okay, that's a little bit of a curveball, so let's
Yeah.
flesh this out as a board. I understand your position, absolutely. Let's,
It's not costing us a penny.
right, so, okay. Ms. Shelton?
I just want to address that, Jack, for a second. My concern, on the grant, is that in the previous applications, the ones that were actually awarded were less than 200,000. And so even though there's more money for the grant this year, the governor's made it very clear that the reason that he increased the amount of money for the grant was to provide it to more people, not necessarily give a larger amount. And so my concern is by adding on to it, that we may preclude us from getting any grant. And so maybe one of our alternatives is to discuss something that you had brought up, which I thought was a great idea, is that we do the grant, and then and by the way, if you guys don't know this, part of the grant is giving Whitewater State Park internet access for the ranger, or the visitor station and the parking lot. So the intent of the grant is to give that for free. What Mr. Cavalier is talking about is expanding that by adding in another antenna and giving all those poor souls, just like Marlboro Point, that are in Whitewater, internet access as well. And so my proposal in this discussion is that we keep it separate, and we approach the EDA with the addition on that once we get the grant. And then Plan B, as you mentioned earlier, is that if we don't get the grant, then we approach it with the EDA, because they're the ones who can make those kind of decisions to fund it in totem, which would include what you're talking about, sir.
Okay. Mrs. Mauer?
So is it possible, and I don't mean to throw more curveballs at you, but it sounds like this is similar to a cell tower, or is this a different type of tower that you guys are adding this equipment on?
in the Whitewater, he's wanting a monopole.
Okay, which
Yeah.
is
It's
similar
just
to
skinny, and it's a skinny pole, and then.
goes
it
as
just-
high as a cell tower?
It can only go what you need to go at. I think this is only, we're talking about 100 feet, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's not that tall, but there's different sizes, but this one particular is 100 feet.
And the only reason I ask that question is we have an agreement with Milestone, and to put, I don't know if they could be useful in that, getting a tower up in which we get a cell tower up there. I'm not certain how your internet access or your cell access is in Widewater, if that's also an option.
None.
Right, yeah, cell service is really limited in that area.
So working with Milestone, if there's an option to put a pole or a tower or something up there, might be something worth exploring. It's your guys' district, but I just want to make sure that you're well aware, and I'm certain you are, of the whole Milestone agreement that we
Right,
have
and
as
the
well.
county agreement with Milestone, it's my understanding, it's an exclusive agreement we have to utilize county properties to put towers on.
What about
Since this-
state properties?
That would not be part of it, is my understanding.
Okay. Okay, so what's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to move for R18-286 approval.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, on today's agenda, we have one item of unfinished business regarding a memorandum of understanding with the Virginia Department of Health. This was initially heard at the board meeting on November 27th. Mr. Smith, item 15, Finance and Budget authorized the county administrator to execute a memorandum of understanding with the Virginia Department of Health, proposed resolution R18-265.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the board. Yes, this was brought back to you at the last board meeting. This agreement is basically the continuation of an agreement that we have with the Department of Public Health. The county has an option of either running the Virginia Department of Health requirements themselves by instituting their own department. This would require hiring a medical doctor to oversee it and to run all the services that they currently do, or enter an agreement with the state and have them run it, and we pay a part of those funds. It's not for additional services, it's just the mandated requirements by the state. The question was asked at the time if we had any control over any additional services that could be done, and with this agreement that does not allow for those additional services, if we wanted to enter into an additional agreement to have additional services, to have more quick inspections or those kind of things, we could try to update the agreement, but that is not what this agreement is. It's only for the state mandated services that must be provided.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Smith? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Oh.
No, I have an amendment to the.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith.
Motion?
Yes.
All right. Madam Chair, I'm going to make a motion to approve this memorandum of understanding. I do it begrudgingly only because I know that it is required. However, I would like to add a caveat to this motion to where we send a letter to the regional and/or the state. I'm going to leave that up to you, Madam Chair, and staff, discussing our unhappiness with the services that we're receiving from the health department. Specifically, in our last meeting, we had discussed how we don't know where the alternative septic systems are. B, we have zero enforcement on whether or not these are being monitored or whether or not the maintenance agreements are being affiliated. So I know staff has some issues that several of us have shared with them regarding some of the services that we're receiving from the health department in relation to this MOU, and I would like to see a letter sent to either the regional and or the state office outlining some of those concerns. It's a very long motion.
Okay. And did you identify the motion R18-265?
I did.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have a motion. Is there a second? Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I'm not so sure what this add-on is. It doesn't make any, I mean, we're complaining to the health department. I mean, how is that helpful? I just don't get it. I'm sorry.
Well, and here's my biggest concern is that this entire time where I have had issues, especially in my district, where the health department has either asked my constituents for extra things and it's delayed the opening of their businesses, and or more importantly, where I have failing septic systems and the health department doesn't do what they need to do in order to protect the next door neighbors where the sewage is running onto their lots. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that we are not doing the monitoring, we are not ensuring the maintenance, and most importantly, as highlighted in our last meeting, we have zero enforcement on the maintenance of these septic systems, and I think that's a huge health risk. And more importantly, and here's the most important aspect to ensuring that they are doing their jobs to the best of their ability. If you look at this memorandum of understanding, if the health department gets sued, if those employees get sued, we pick up that cost. 100% of that cost. We have to defend them. So if we have to defend them, yet we know, as it's been told to us, that they're not necessarily doing everything that they're required to do as outlined in the regulations, I think we put the entire county at risk. And so I think it's incumbent upon this board and prudent to at least alert the regional office to this issue.
Mr. Smith, I see you sitting on the edge of your seat. Would you like to address the board again?
I would just like to clarify that if the health department is sued for supporting a local ordinance that goes beyond the state regulations, then we would cover. But we don't really have anything in our local ordinances since we removed the septic stuff at the last. Okay. So it would only be if they're going above and beyond to follow our ordinances that are past theirs.
I appreciate that. However, we are still getting zero enforcement as outlined in the last meeting.
So perhaps, would it meet your needs, Ms. Maurer, if we sent a letter under separate cover to the state regarding your concerns?
Absolutely.
Okay.
As long as in approving this memorandum of understanding, we are also ensuring that we are expressing our concerns. It doesn't have to go with the memorandum of understanding, but I think we need to do some sort of expression of our concerns about some of the support that we're receiving that, quite frankly, we're paying half of.
Okay. Mr. Foley, did you have something
Madam
to
Chair,
add?
I think we're pretty clear on this issue. I would think that actually other localities would have the same complaint because of the level of staffing with health departments, but I think getting on record of the concern, particularly related to an environmental issue, is not an unusual thing for us to do.
Yes.
And if memory serves, we have a precedent in this where we sent a letter to VDOT expressing our displeasure about how they accrued money to us and said that we had to pay money when we really didn't think that was equitable. So I think we have a precedent for doing this, and the only way that the higher-ups will ever change is if the localities stand up for themselves.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments? Okay, we have a motion, and did we have a second? Yes, we did. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Cohen. All right, any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, please cast your vote. Tally the vote. Thank you. That motion passes unanimously. We have 4 items of new business today. The first item is the comprehensive road evaluation that we had to pull off the last month's agenda because we ran out of time. So I know the board is very anxious and the community to hear about our Public Works Transportation comprehensive road evaluation. Mr. Dayton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Keith Dayton, I'm project manager for the road evaluation. And can you advance it, Cheryl? So at the beginning of the year, the board established transportation improvements as a board priority. They followed up in March by authorizing a comprehensive road evaluation. At that same meeting, the board designated a working group, 2 board members, to work with staff to provide oversight and guidance as the study progressed. In addition, we've come back to the Infrastructure Committee on a few occasions to provide updates and seek guidance. We're completed at phase 1 right now, and it's a good opportunity certainly to bring the whole board up to speed on where the study's at and to provide information to the public as well. Thank you. So we began by setting the scope of the study, and we've got thousands of roads and we couldn't study them all, so we began by pulling back on some of the major primary roads in Stafford. So we didn't look in any detail at Route 1, Route 17, and Route 3. And obviously, Interstate 95 would be a bit too much for this evaluation. And then we pulled off the virtually all the subdivision streets, partly because they would have less impact and partly because the impracticality of working in the subdivisions. But we still had over 200 secondary roads to begin with, which is a lot of roads, and that left two smaller primaries, Butler Road and White Oak Road, to be looked at in more detail. We then came back to the Infrastructure Committee, and the decision was made to pare the study back to those roads that had traffic counts of over 1,000 vehicles per day. And then we used 2016 traffic counts to establish that baseline. That left us with 94 roads. Went back and looked at the 94 roads, and some of those roads couldn't be looked at in one major section because of the variation along the roads. I'll use Garrisonville Road as an example. It changes remarkably as it moves west across the county from I-95 out to the Fauquier County line, so you couldn't look at that entire road as a single segment. So when we broke it all down into logical segments, we ended up with 114, which basically added 20 more road segments to look at in more detail. We went to VDOT and asked for traffic count data. And then we supplemented that traffic count data with targeted counts using our own equipment where we didn't feel VDOT data was adequate for the purposes of the study. VDOT also provided 3 years of accident data, crash, injury, and fatality, and we used 2015, 2016, and 2017. At the end of 2017, was the cutoff. So we get complete data. It was entered into the computer. It made it easier to access. And then we also got some more information, some data from the sheriff's office. We pulled together constituent reports of road problems. We looked at previously completed studies on some of our selected roads. And then we looked at road construction characteristics and unusual traffic patterns that could affect road safety and also operational performance. So as we progressed, we evaluated those selected roads based on a number of different criteria. We started with traffic count per lane. That's a measure of both congestion and safety. The road width, and also whether they had shoulders, sidewalks, and that sort of thing, which tend to make roads safer. Again, the crash, injury, and fatality rates that we had available to us. And then we looked at potential for future traffic growth. I'll get into a little more detail on how that scored out. We had unscored criteria, which included whether improvements were recently completed on those segments of roads, or funded or under design, whether we had received motorist complaints about various characteristics on these roads. And then we looked at special traffic conditions, examples of which were high counts of truck and trailer traffic, whether we had a high number of youth drivers around our high schools in particular, and subject to periodic flooding. And then also whether there was a traffic safety study done previously. We then segregated the roads using 1,700 vehicle per day per lane, with the idea being that we wanted to look at roads that were similar in use and get the smaller roads evaluated together and the larger used roads evaluated together as well. So that brought us down to 57 roads or road segments above 1,700 vehicle per day per lane and 57 below. And in looking at the vehicle use, again, we adjusted them for vehicle per day per lane, and we gave higher scores to the heavier traveled roads. Maximum score would be over 10,000 vehicle per day per lane, and that reduced down to 100 points if you had less than 2,000 vehicle per day per lane. Again, we looked at the structural characteristics of each road, essentially width, and the way we did that was used aerial mapping to identify whether they had no center line, no edge line, no shoulders. That would be your narrowest roads, typically under 18 feet wide or 9 feet per lane, 300 points. Center line, but no edge lines, those would be between 18 and 20 feet, 200 points. And then the full complement of center line, edge lines, but no shoulders, which many, many roads in Stafford have. That's 100 points. And then if it has all of the above with shoulders or sidewalks, curb and gutter, then they weren't awarded any points. We looked at the safety record again. These are 3-year rates, and we compared them against statewide average data. And the way we scored out the crash rates, maximum was 300. If the crash rates were over the state average, between 6/10 and equal to the state average, 200 points, down to less than 4/10 of the state average, was awarded no points. Injury rates, we started above 3 times the state average for 500 points, between 1 and 3 times state average, 300. And then if they had less than half the state average, they were awarded no points. And finally, fatality rates varied from a high of 300 down to 0. We weighed injury statistics a little heavily, more heavily, because you get a bigger sampling data, and these also are roads that tend to identify themselves as more dangerous for travel, higher speed limits, characteristics of the roads which are more unsafe. So then we looked at potential for growth. This was a bit more of a subjective category, but we looked at roads that provide major routes from the east to the west back to the center of the county. Pretty much all of our population tries to migrate back to I-95 and Route 1 to our commercial centers or to our major commuter thoroughfares. So if it fit in that category, it would have 300 points. Our major secondaries, areas with significant growth pressures, roads that would serve some planned future infrastructure that we could anticipate more traffic would be headed to, and then cut-through roads, and we have a number of those as well. And then the balance of the roads would get 100 points just because all of our roads seem to be increasing in traffic over time. So the last infrastructure committee in October, we brought the report essentially at this stage of development. And after the infrastructure committee meeting, it was recommended that we look at the 20th highest ranking roads or road segments in each category, although the committee left open the option to add some additional roads if further study indicated that would be warranted, or after we had some additional board input. Following that process, we ended up with a total of 63 roads that were included for additional study. That also pulled in some of the Youth Driver Task Force roads that didn't meet the original 20 road criteria, but obviously the Youth Driver Task Force felt that these were roads of particular concern, and we felt like we ought to pull those in as well. And there was a number of roads that had very similar scores, but just missed the 20 road cutoff, so we pulled those in. And finally, some that were subject to a number of citizen complaints, continued complaints that felt like it warranted some further study. So again, 38 in the category above 1,700 vehicle per day per lane and 25 below that 1,700 threshold. The list that follows is not intended to signify a ranked order, but it just includes all of the lists that are on, all the roads that are on the list. So these are the roads above. I won't go into them individually, but I'd be happy to entertain any questions if a board member wants to ask about one in particular. And then the list for below 1,700, again, fairly comprehensive and still open for inclusion of additional roads at this stage of the study as well.
Keith, I know you say it's not in ranked order, but you had this initial draft come out, and they're still in the same order that they were when you first presented them to us in the draft, and then you did a second iteration considering other factors. But could you reorder those with that? Because if the public looks at this and, you know, case in point is Decatur Road. You know, had a lower ranking, then came back with a higher ranking, and so it would move significantly up on the list. And so I'd just like the spreadsheet to be reflective of the actual final ranking now.
Okay.
At this point, not the final, but the current ranking.
Uh-huh.
You
All right.
understand what I mean?
Yes, we can adjust that.
Okay.
The list, yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Shelton?
Mr. Dayton, first of all, what you have done here is just amazing, and I want to thank Mr. Dudenheffer and Mrs. Maurer for helping and working on this project with you. Back to what you're saying, Mr. Cavalier, I think that from all our conversations, we know that since October 24th, you've done a huge amount of work, but the board doesn't really know, the public doesn't know. Do you think it's possible, or may I suggest that we have not just this forum, because it is complicated, but that we have a couple of town halls to educate the populace on what this looks like? Because all the data that he's talking about, guys, is very objective. And our intent of this process, if you didn't know, was to come out with objective criteria that would be able to rack and stack our roads and tell us where our most critical issues are and let us understand that, as well as figure out how much money and where we're going to get it from for the future to address it. Because Stafford County, most of us would say our number one issue is our roads. So my proposal is that Mr. Dayton bring the new information or the latest information he has on those priorities to a couple of town halls.
Yeah, so Mr. Dayton and I had a conversation about that, and I've even talked to Andrew Spence, our communication officer, about if we did a town hall. A lot of people can't physically come, but we can stream live now. Is that right, Andrew? So we're going to be talking down the road about how we get this information out and how we make sure that the public is well aware of where we started in the process, what we have moved to, and what we're going to be doing in the future. So great point, Ms. Shelton. Mr. Dudenheffer?
Yeah, Ms. Shelton, we had lengthy conversations about figuring ways to get this into the hands of the public. It doesn't do us any good unless they have it and see it. It looks kind of simplified just looking at your list here. Everyone needs to know that behind that is this huge spreadsheet with all this data lined up. And before I say anything else, Keith, I got to tell you, I knew when we gave you this project that we were going to get something that was going to be really spectacular. And you've exceeded, I think, Wendy and I's expectations in so many ways as we go through this. To expound on something Ms. Shelton said about our goal going into this is every one of us wants to be able to hold up this list to the public and say, this is a list based on as much objective data as we can possibly get it. It's not a political list. It's not my favorite project. It's not the chairman's favorite project. It's a list that is backed up by data. I think we're at a point now where obviously a lot of this was presented at our infrastructure committee in October. We were supposed to present this earlier in November, so the process has not stopped along the way, and there are additional phases in the analysis that Mr. Dayton is working on. So obviously, the big piece of data that's not quite there yet is what does it cost to do each of the projects? And to break down the projects, I think you're looking at intersections and different things. Like, instead of a whole road section, maybe you can just fix an intersection or whatever. So it's important that we get this out to the public. And we need to be able to convince them that we've done our homework, that this is the list, this is what it costs, and do you really think it's what we need to get done? And if you do, well, we're going to need your support moving forward. It's critical that we get to that. But again, Keith, you've exceeded all expectations in so many ways that you're coming back, right? You're not going to retire permanently, all right? That's the quick way for somebody to get fired, is to let you go. So,
All right, Ms. Mauer?
Okay. So a couple of things for the data geeks out there, and I see one of our prolific bloggers. There is the big spreadsheet in the background package with all of the information.
Next slide.
Oh, it's the next slide.
The next
We're
slide.
jumping the gun.
Oh, am I jumping the gun on you there?
We thought you had already ended.
We
Okay.
thought you were done, Mr. Dayton. So this is the beautiful.
We'll let him finish.
Well, I'm gonna let you finish, but I would like our blogger back there to take note on the objectiveness of this data.
So this is shrunk down just a little bit, but it is the basic information that was used to develop phase one. There's more to come, and to provide a racked, stacked order up to this point in the study. The highlight on the left just identifies on the study the same roads that were in the list that was provided just a moment ago. So this is how the roads got pulled out, got graded, and then pulled out and entered onto the list. So we just run through it. I won't go through every number on there. I'm sure you'd be fascinated, but we'll move through. So this continues the over 1,700 vehicle per day per lane list, and if you notice, they're bunched pretty much together. There's 38 actually, because as we went through, Mountain View Road needed to be broke down a little further because there was some interesting crash information that needed to be looked at a little more closely. So there's actually 38 on the list, but the numbers are grouped together, and they're the first ones on the list. Moving to the smaller, one more, and then on the smaller roads, the first ones on the list are grouped tight together, and then we have Richards Ferry Road, Brook Road, and Decatur Road. Again, this is just phase one, and it's a combination of ranking and a combination of special considerations that merited further investigation. And so additional analysis, we have to review the accident patterns on our selected roadways, and now that it got pared down, it's more manageable. Coordinate our findings with our stakeholders in this effort.
Okay,
Mr. Dayton, I'm gonna
Mauer.
interrupt you there for a second,
All right.
because in your beautiful engineer speak, you're like, and this is what we're going to do. However, I think it's very important for the public to understand what specifically you're looking at. For example, if you've got a long stretch of road and you see, and I think we have this at the Juggins Road over there by Dockstone, we've got all these accidents, but all these accidents are really in the parking lot. I mean, we're doing this amount of detail when we look at this accident data, correct?
That is correct, yes. So using your
I'm trying to
example.
help you here, Keith.
That's right. So using your example, when you look at Dockstone Road, it had a fairly high ranking, but it turned out that by far and away, the majority of the accidents were up in the commercialized area in the retail center, where people were pulling out, pulling in, and they were getting accidents up very, very close to Route 610. Well, there's not a lot the county can step in and do on that. There's just a lot going on, and unfortunately, people continue to have fender benders up there. Perhaps a better example was how we looked at it and broke down Mountain View Road for further investigation. When you took that whole segment from Centerport Parkway all the way up to Shelton Shop Road, it didn't score very high. But then when you took a look at the road, you find that really the bulk of the accidents are happening between Kellogg Mill Road and Chop Tank Road. Yes, that's a little bit further west of Shelton Shop Road, but a lot of people are having accidents along that road, and I'm sure some of them are related to the high school out there, Mountain View High School, our youth drivers. But Stefaniga Road had a number of accidents there. That one made the list for a smart scale project, which we may or may not get funding. But they're happening all along that segment. So when you look at it, you say, well, if I look at all of this road, it isn't going to make the list. But if I narrow it down, maybe we can identify a project that the board should be made aware of. And so that happened in a number of areas. When you start to look at where the crashes are happening, when you read how the crashes are happening, why they're happening, it helps clarify some thinking, and tried to pull some of that into the next phases of the study that we're moving into.
And the reason this is important is, we've got all of these numbers, and we've put this list with all the rankings out there, but I would also like the public to know that we're getting down into the nitty-gritty details to understand, what those numbers of crashes really mean in order to see if we can make a measurable difference to the safety of our roads. And I want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues here. This is good work. It's work we should be doing, and I'm appreciative of what you're doing with it.
Thank you. So when we get into the next phase or phases, we would look to update the priority scoring. We look to reduce the list perhaps once again to focus on certain higher priority roads. It's going to be tough to fund 38 individual projects. That's going to be extraordinarily expensive. So perhaps you want to pare that back a little bit and look at perhaps some other alternatives to get at some of these road problems we're having. Identify the potential improvements, estimate the cost, and I would also add to that the opportunity for some public input into this process over and above just speaking in front of the board. So the next steps, obviously we're on November 27th, so this is the first full presentation of the study and where we're at. If the board feels it's desirable, they could formally adopt the road list, and we could be back before the board on December 11th if that was again desired. We could be back for a presentation of the additional analysis on February 5th, incorporate some board input, and on March 5th, and then look to have a more robust discussion on funding and selection of projects on March 19th. That's just a tentative schedule. As it was mentioned previously, the study has progressed, and there's certainly some flexibility to that. So
Okay, so with that, I had a conversation with Keith yesterday on this because I wanted to go over everything individually. Sometimes I can't absorb it all when I'm in a meeting. And I would personally love to see this on the December 11th meeting, but I will work at the will of the board. So thoughts, comments?
I would really like to see it December 11th, because I know that Keith has done a lot of work. I think we're there. We're just a little behind in keeping us updated.
Okay.
And because once we set the initial criteria and agreed with Mr. Dayton on what needed to be, I mean, he pressed forward. We're there.
Correct.
So.
Okay, Mr. Dudenheffer, we're in the essence of time, if we could kind of keep our comments short, because we have a couple other items and still closed session.
But we're still talking about the most important thing.
Absolutely,
down
Mr.
here, so,
Dudenheffer. No doubt in my mind.
It's important to understand, at the end of this, we have a list, and if I was sitting out there, I'd be saying, okay, you have a list. I could have told you most of the projects on the list to start with. So we need to keep pushing forward. If we proceed with different strategies on funding in the future, we need to keep it in the early parts of the 2019 schedule. So I really think we need to continue to press hard on everything that we're doing and not give time to get up and catch his breath, let him work forward on this that he's doing. So I really believe the December 11th meeting would be ideal for him to present the rest of the data. And
All
then-
right.
Madam Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
I have spoke about the next phases with 4 of the 7 board members, and I want to make sure that I offer that same opportunity to the 3 that I haven't met with. It's just been progressing over the last few days, and I meant to reach out sooner to see if we could possibly get on your schedule. So,
Okay. Tom?
I agree that this is one of the great topics that faces our county. And I applaud the work you did. I mean, I think when we first met, a month or so ago, I said, I really wasn't that worried about the methodology because you were behind it, and the level of your, the quality of work is just amazing. I am concerned that if I were a person sitting out at home, trying to look at a tiny screen, little bar thing on there, that the idea that by December 11th, I'm not sure that's what Ms. Shelton was saying, getting public input, but they'll have no input on that part. I guess the public input is perceived as we would just want to tell them, this is how we arrived at our list, this is what we think it is, and that you should go along with it. So, but I understand that we need to move forward, so I'm not, I'll go with it December 11th, but I'm just curious what Ms. Shelton meant by public input. If the public's going to have input into which roads and how they thought, then that's different than, we want you to back what we want you to do. So, but I think the work you have done has been phenomenal.
Quick clarification, the definition of public input is really communication, to communicate to them on how we arrived at this. No, we would not be able to change it. There's no way that they would know what he knows.
Right. Okay, anybody else? Mr. Snellings?
I say we move forward. The vote on December the 11th is not the priorities list. It is just accepting the list, correct, Mr. Dayton? So I think we need to move forward. Obviously, we want public input on the priorities list, but the list that we're going to vote on December 11th is based on actual facts.
Correct.
That's how they got on the list. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Cavalier?
And Keith, this additional meeting, this is something above and beyond the meeting that I had with you before?
Yes, sir, Mr. Cavalier. As it was mentioned, since October and the Infrastructure Committee, I've advanced it and took advantage of the 8 weeks. Obviously, if there's any direction for any other road to be added, it would be added immediately. That's not an issue, but it's progressed well beyond now the study, what was presented here today.
So I need to schedule a session with you, is that what you're telling me?
I would love an opportunity to sit down and go through where we're at right now.
Okay.
With you.
Great.
Okay.
Just one last comment, Madam Chairman, is we know the roads that we drive on, and we think, human nature, we think our roads have need the most work. I mean, I don't ride on the roads out in Tom's district very much. I don't know. I stay mostly in North Stafford. That's where I live. So I think 610, Shelton Shop, Courthouse Road are the most important roads. So left to me to make the decision or to get input from anyone in my district, they're going to say that's the roads that they think need to be worked. And that's the whole purpose of this exercise that we're going through here, is to provide data that supports what the list is going to do. If you've noticed, the number one item on the list is Butler Road, and I would never have guessed that Butler Road had a traffic issue that even surpassed what I thought on 610. So it's really important that we keep it objective and that we be able to explain it and move forward from there. So.
Okay, so it looks like we have consensus. Thank you very much, Mr. Dayton, for all your efforts here. Your work's been phenomenal, and we appreciate the fact that since we kind of moved you off the last meeting, that you just kept working. So thank you for that. All right. Next item under new business is item number 17. Oh, wait a minute. got ahead of me. 17, this is the Public Works, consider an amendment to the county's water and sewer extension policy. Mr. Towery.
Sure. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. Jason Towery, Director of Public Works. In an effort to be aware of your time, we did go over most of this at the board's Infrastructure Committee meeting in October. I'm happy to go back over that if you'd like, or there was one point of clarification I did want to request of the board. If you'd rather prefer to just go to that point, I can do that.
Why don't you just give us a quick
Quick
management summary and then go
Sure.
to that point, please?
So for the past year, the Utilities Commission and staff have been working to make or propose modifications to the water and sewer extension policy to alleviate the significant amount of funds that the Utilities Fund has been incurring to extend public water and sewer to various neighborhoods. There's a number of recommendations that were brought before the board at the last Infrastructure Committee meeting, essentially to try and reduce the amount of scope and administrative authority that we had as a department to do these projects without some more board oversight, and to alleviate some of these financial burdens that the utility fund was incurring. One item that the Infrastructure Committee did request that staff make a revision to at the last meeting was to reduce the amount. The Utility Commission recommended maintaining the neighborhood project threshold at $500,000. And there was a recommendation from the Infrastructure Committee to reduce that number down to $100,000. And as staff was going back through that, we have some concerns that $100,000 may overly limit the ability to perform neighborhood projects. And could perhaps inhibit some of the cost effectiveness that you can gain through some neighborhood projects. So staff wanted to just bring that to your attention. If it is the board's will to stick with the $100,000 limit at the Infrastructure Committee recommended, we would probably just recommend at that point removing the neighborhood projects per se and just maintaining small extension projects, as those are much more feasible in that range of dollars. Or perhaps if the board wanted to consider another threshold, $250,000 was something that staff thought might be a good recommendation where we could still accommodate those neighborhood projects. Of course, anything over $100,000 comes before the board. The board would have oversight of those dollars to be able to say yay or nay as well. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. We're prepared to bring that back in either format on the 11th.
Okay, what's the will of the board? Questions for Mr. Towery?
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Towery, thank you for bringing that up. That's exactly what I was going to ask you. I attended a Utilities Commission meeting when they talked about this, and and I'm not on the infrastructure team, and so I was concerned about what that was going to do. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and I am definitely supportive of removing the NEPs.
Removing the what?
Aren't they called NEPs, the neighborhood
Neighbor-
extension
neighborhoods.
projects? Okay.
So,
I'm sharing my view.
okay,
My view is take them out.
okay.
Okay. Ms. Mauer, did you have a question?
So I saw in here, and I just read it, and now I'm missing it, where if it's more than 3 homes, there's a service district.
So currently, right now, we have the way that the policy is set up, and the recommendation for the policy is if it's 3 homes or less, it would be it could be done as a short extension project. But if it's more than 3 homes, it would go into a neighborhood project. Really, that number is somewhat arbitrary. It has been one that we've used before very effectively in the past, and I think it's a good number, but that number could change. That's not tied to saying it will be a service district or will not be a service district.
So here's where I see it. Projects exceeding 100,000 should follow the process for a service district, but that process that you talk about in here, I don't see actually incorporated in the policy.
By process, are you discussing the service district process, or are you discussing the neighborhood extension?
This piece of paper right here, attachment 1, page 2 of 3, which is the policy.
Yes.
But the resolution, I don't see where that language made it into the actual resolution. Now, if you're telling me that we're adopting the policy as presented as part of the resolution, do you see where my confusion is?
One's not included in the other.
Right. So if we vote on the resolution, but it doesn't incorporate this aspect of the policy,
That's correct, and I apologize. The resolution, I'm looking at, I see what you're saying. Yes, that language, the intention is for that language to be included in Resolution R-18-296.
okay, so
You're correct, yes.
okay.
That-
So we need to make that correction.
Yes,
All
absolutely.
right. I'm just making sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what's the will of the board on the rest of the policy regarding the 100,000 versus 250, neighborhood, small? Do you want to,
Bring them both forward, but make sure you include the language
Sure.
in the policy into the resolution so
Okay.
it becomes official.
So just so I'm clear, two options. One with the 100,000, one with the 250 for neighborhoods.
okay,
Okay, understood. Thank you.
all right, everybody good? Okay, thank you, Mr. Towery. Moving right along to item number 18, Planning and Zoning, review Planning Commission recommendations for adoption of a new cluster development area map. And this is for discussion, it's new business, and we would consider it being voted on at the December 11th meeting.
Okay, if I can have the computer, please. All right, good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the board. Mike Zaraf, the Planning and Zoning Department. I'm here to talk to you about the potential proposed new cluster development area map options. On March 20th earlier this year, the board adopted Ordinance 18-13. It did limit the area where cluster development could occur. This was due to long-term concerns about viability of septic systems on smaller lots. The area where cluster development can occur was identified on an adopted map, and the area included the urban service area and areas adjacent to the urban service area. I'd note that the state code does mandate that 40% of unimproved parcels be made eligible for cluster development. So cluster development as an option has to be made available in some areas of the county. On April 17th, earlier this year, the board did adopt then another resolution asking the Planning Commission to revisit the cluster development regulations and provide its recommendations for changes. So the Planning Commission at this point, after receiving that resolution, formed two subcommittees. One committee evaluated policies and regulations, and then another subcommittee considered preparing a new cluster area map.
Before we get to the maps, just, again, I'm going to go back to the 40% question again. The 40% requirement, is it always maintaining a 40%? So whereas if we just do 40% and then a cluster development occurs in that area, then do we have to add more area to come back to 40%?
I think to be safe, you'd want to make sure you always maintain 40%,
If not more.
if not more.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
and we're going to do more than 40% in this iteration, it looks like?
Yes.
But once it falls below the 40% is what I'm concerned about. Does it automatically get added to in some fashion?
Not necessarily without, you know, if there's, if the county has a map that has a limited area, then, and for some reason we're below 40%, the map would need to be amended to go back above 40%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Zaraf, as we're looking at the different percentages here, what are we finding as the common practice in the Commonwealth with other jurisdictions in the Crescent area? What numbers are they typically settling on that are high growth like us?
I'm not aware of any other localities that have limited cluster development areas like this, where they're actually mapping out a smaller area.
Okay.
Yeah. So if there are any, I've not looked into that and I'm not aware of what their percentage is. They do. Okay. Okay.
Okay, continue.
Okay. So when the subcommittee was working on this, preparing a new map, some of the goals and guidelines in their work was to increase the area that where it would be permitted, focus the cluster development area where land would be more considered more suitable, evenly spread the areas across election districts.
Mr. Zaraf?
Yes.
Ms. Shelton?
Mr. Zaraf, could you define what you mean by more suitable? What criteria were they using to define suitable?
I'll get to that in the next slide. Yeah, yes. And also maintain clustered areas relatively close to the current urban services area and current defined area, and also base area boundaries on transportation area zones. So I'll go on to the next. So the process to go through this, the MAP subcommittee, they had two meetings. They began by evaluating development constraints as one of the factors in determining how to draw these lines. They looked at 5 different factors in determining suitability. This included proximity to fire stations, groundwater suitability for private wells, military facility impacts. There are military impacts felt in the county, as we know, and also proximity to public water and proximity to public sewer lines. So the factors were applied to unimproved parcels, and they were scored based on their ability to meet these factors, and this produced a suitability analysis map that you see on the right. The parcels received a score of from 5 to 0,
Madam Chair?
5 being the most suitable.
Cohen.
Yes.
Okay, and just only because we just had that terrific data from Mr. Dayton. Is that scoring of the various things, I don't see that. Is that available for us to look at? To see that, just because that was so wonderful, I just would be curious to see that.
On a parcel by parcel basis.
Right, if it's, that would be helpful.
Yeah, we did not look, we looked at it as a more general basis, so we would have to
Okay.
generate that and can provide that
Thank
to
you.
you.
I think
though.
that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Madam Chairman.
Yes,
Mr.
Ms.
Zaraf-
Shelton?
Mr. Zaraf, I have another question. When you talked about unimproved, I assume you're talking about unimproved A1, R1, or,
Yeah.
and when you say unimproved, that means no houses?
Right, unimproved, yeah, there are no improvements, no
Zero.
taxable improvements on the property, and properties zoned A1, A2, or R1.
And so if you had a property that was 100 acres and you had a house on it, that wouldn't be included?
Right,
Okay.
right. For the purposes of the calculation. Yeah. So from this, with this map, the committee identified general areas for staff to map out an expanded cluster area boundary. Committee then reviewed a draft cluster area boundary, made adjustments for the purpose of developing 3 optional maps. The goal of the maps were to provide varying amounts of unimproved properties within the cluster area, specifically 60%, 55%, and 50%. So the amount of eligible land was divided by transportation area zones. They used this to determine specific amounts to add or remove as they were making their adjustments. So November 14th, the Planning Commission accepted the recommendations of the committee and referred these 3 optional maps for the board consideration, and I'll go through. I've got 2 series of maps. This is map option 1, and I'm going to point out the changes from the current cluster area map. Option 1, this map includes 60% of unimproved area within the cluster's designated area. The cluster area includes both shaded areas. The more yellow shading is the area within the urban service area, and then the darker, more orange shading is the portion that's outside of the urban service area. So this is helpful in showing the amount of expansion outside of the urban service area. Just kind of going through the change areas from the current cluster map. First, in Hartwood, from Poplar and Kellogg Mill, it expanded to the north and west, out towards Hartwood and Stony Hill Road. Also then extending north from Kellogg Mill Road along Mountain View Road into Rock Hill. All of this area was added. There was a reduction in Widewater. Property between Quantico and Widewater Road was removed. Also then in the Aquia District, the area was extended east along Brook Road and out onto the Marlborough Peninsula to include that area. And then in Falmouth and the George Washington District, expanding eastward in generally all of this area. And then that extended eastward to approximately Newton and Quezon roads. So that was option 1. Option 2, this map includes 55% in cluster areas. So just to point out changes from option 1, the area identified out in this location was removed. The area in this location was removed. And actually, I want to point out the cluster area limit is within and inside the urban service area, generally in this location. Then in Widewater, there was some additional reduction between Arkandale Road and Potomac River. And then in George Washington, this area was removed along Newton Road and Belle Plains Road. So then map option 3, this cluster area includes 50% of unimproved area in the urban service area. This had included 2 changes from the option 2 map. In Widewater, there was some additional reduction south of Widewater Road. And then in Falmouth, this portion was removed between Leland Road and Brook Road. And again, this new boundary is inside of the urban service area, goes all the way to Leland Road and Deacon Road. So if you have one more, the next series of maps are the same 3 options, but you'll just see the comparison to the current cluster area map. This is the current cluster area map that exists now, and that's shaded in on these 3 options in green, in light green. So the new boundaries you can see in the orange show the change. So again, option 1, 60% map, you have expansions in this area to the west, in these 2 areas. You have reductions in Widewater, and then you have expansions in Aquia and in Falmouth and George Washington. Option 2, slight expansion along Mountain View Road in Hartwood, further reductions in Widewater, and then the same expansions, slightly less so here in Widewater. And then option 3, I guess the only changes here then are the additional reductions in Widewater and then this area in Falmouth. So during the Planning Commission review, they requested a comparison of the proposed cluster area by election district. These comparisons are provided for each of the map options. They're included in your package. On the screen is just a sample of how each election district is summarized. It breaks out the cluster area by inside versus outside of the urban service area, the sum total inside, then the area outside of the cluster area. Areas tabulated by total acres and percentage of the district, the area in the cluster area. So I've highlighted the area inside the cluster area that's located outside of the urban service area. That I felt is maybe the comparison factor that best addresses the goal of providing a more equal distribution of cluster areas outside of the urban service area. So I'm not going to go through that in detail, but that's just additional data that was provided to you for your information. So again, the Planning Commission forwarded these 3 options to you for your consideration. Staff does recommend the board select a preferred map based on the 3 options. If modifications to one of the maps is desired, staff recommends that the changes be made based on the transportation area zone boundaries, again, providing a good defining location for the boundaries. And then the preferred option map could potentially be considered for public hearing authorization at your next meeting on December 11th.
Okay. Mr. Snellings?
Yeah, good presentation. I guess my question is, since the state only requires 40%, and I understand why we're doing a minimum, I think the lowest was 50%, why wouldn't we go 45%?
Well, it may bring up the need to, maybe within just a few years come back. That you could, but it runs
So in other
the
words,
potential.
you're saying you protect us from having to come back every 6 months or every year.
Well, yeah, it'd probably be a little more than a year, but, if on a frequent basis
I
having
don't
to
know the way they're
amend it.
building Hartwood. I don't think it's going to be more than a year.
Yeah.
The other thing is, we had some speakers earlier about Marlboro Point, and I agree with them. Marlboro Point, not in my district, of course, but that's a very sensitive area. And I'm not sure why they chose to put cluster down there, because you've got some marshlands, and you could easily cluster into the non-sensitive area and get the full yield. So I'm not sure I agree with that, but I'll defer the Quiet District Supervisor on that one.
Yeah, if I can address that, the part of their using the transportation area zones, it kind of reached out a good distance, and they kind of went by the transportation area zones. So, potentially reducing that somehow might be an option for you to consider.
So I guess one of the questions would be, when I guess I think back to PDR and the way we ranked PDR, and everything had a different weight. So when you looked at the transportation zone versus the soil, stormwater, sewer, did everything weigh equally? Yeah. Or were there different metrics for each category?
It did. They did have equal weight, each of those 5 factors.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm not sure about that. But anyway, I know Mr. Cohen had a question.
Just a general, because I know we're not acting on this today, and I appreciate you. You've done a lot of work on this, and we spoke yesterday on the phone for a while. I'm not pleased with any of the maps, the boundaries, and we've talked about that. I also feel that, and I said this to you, that we'll probably have a time to meet. Maybe I can just take a 2 for see Mr. Dayton and see Mr. Zuref, and spend a whole day annoying you all. I'm curious where there are existing clusters already, so that we see that on the map. Because I know in my area, there's certain roads that have clusters on them already, and if that's sort of the norm, then there may be a propensity we want to put that there. As I said, and then Ms. Bomke said, I really am curious about the breakdown and the criteria, because I don't know that all 5 of those criteria would have the same weight. I have, in general, I just feel rushed. And I understand why, but you said the subcommittee and the planning had 2 meetings, and then the subcommittee, and then the full planning commission voted on the 14th, and then here we are. And I understand why. Ms. McClendon and I spoke, but I do feel that as a whole, the county hasn't had a discussion of where we want to put things and where do we want the growth to be. And I just feel as though this is sort of a replay from earlier this year when we felt rushed on this. And having knocked on many a door and talked to people, this is the number 1 area issue in my area, is development and growth. And so that, from my standpoint, I just look at this and say we really need a lot more work on this, personally. And I echo what Mr. Snelling said about Marlboro.
Okay, Mr. Cavalier?
Every one of these, you say pick one of the 3, but on the downloaded product that I have right here that I was just able to do right before the meeting because I annotate doesn't work now like it used to work, and so I had to take it up to John, and he finally got it in because they switched something around yesterday. But so I'm seeing a map 1A and 1B and 2A and 2B and 3A and 3B. Now, which ones are we looking at to choose? Pick 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, 1A, it basically, the series that has the A is just the comparison of the three options against the urban service area where you see the two different color shadings.
What am I choosing? Am I choosing A's or B's?
It's not, yeah, you could probably disregard the A or the B. That's just, there's two different map series, and it's map 1A and 1B is basically has the same boundary. It's just the information within it is different. So 1A, you'll see the urban service area within that boundary or on the map, and 1B, you'll see the current cluster map in comparison.
Okay, that would have been nicer to know before the meeting. Yeah, I'm not prepared to do anything today.
Well, we're not voting on this today, so this is all for information. Ms. Shelton?
Pardon me, because I have a lot to say. First of all, you know that I absolutely love cluster development, and I like it because I live in an area where it's flooded, and so I know that the decrease of the amount of impervious surfaces is in our interest. And also, after all the broadband, I now know that if you're in a 3-acre lot, you'll never get fiber. And so some of those things are my concern, are the things that I like. But you know what is really missing for us, and that's, I'm going to share with what you guys are saying, is that even though you're considering the TASs, you're not considering that Marlboro Point down there off Brook Road, the one place that we talk about almost every meeting that floods every time it rains. And so now that's the area where you're moving all these more houses to. So now I have more people at risk in an area where, what did I say before? They have no broadband, they have no cell phone, and they have no way out. So, no, I'm against all of the maps. Not interested.
And also just remind the board, it's not one map or the other. I mean, if there are adjustments that the board wishes to, you want us to look at and come back, we can definitely do that as well. So it's not all or nothing with each option.
Right.
Yeah, so I just want to, one of the arguments we talked about was you're moving all of these houses, but just because we move cluster doesn't necessarily mean we remove all the houses there. Theoretically, and that was the argument of those who were against, shrinking the cluster areas to begin with, was that it was the same 1 per 3 acres. They were just being consolidated. So I want to clarify. Those that pushed for the maps to be drawn up had declared that there was a bonus density that was inherently being done. So I just want to make sure those arguments are out there.
Right.
Okay, there's a lot of work that's gone into this. We appreciate all your efforts. I think you've heard from different members of the board.
Right.
And
Madam Chair, I might ask, perhaps that you all be interested in a different kind of setting to work through the final things, particularly if there are adjustments to maps? Or is there additional feedback now that would help staff to come with some alternatives? The Marlboro Point one is a good example of somewhere that we might say, does it make sense for that to even be permitted? But
well, and I think that there are only so many areas we can go in the county. So let's say the board was unanimous about Marlboro Point. I feel that I know the water issues you have out there. I have water issues in my district, and I don't want anybody else to have any more than what they already have. So let's say we pulled that back, okay? And you didn't, that has to go someplace else in the county. It doesn't? Well, right, we would reduce our percentage, but we still need to stay above 40%.
Yeah, the smallest
Correct.
map is 50%.
Right, correct.
Who says we have to have a map? We're the only ones who said we had to have a map.
without a map, you then have cluster everywhere.
Actually, what we could do is set the criteria for where that needs to be without a map. But we talked about that a long time ago. I'm just sharing you my opinion. So,
Can we do that?
I'm not,
Yeah.
yeah.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If I could, one thing, and I forget who raised it, I think it was you, but I could have sworn there were other communities that are doing different things. And maybe it's just because I was on planning so long when we first started clustering, but I could swear there's other districts that didn't go 100% and they went for different. So I think we need to know that information. I've already told Mr. Zaraf, and I've said it here, that the boundary in my district is unpalatable. So that I think is, I don't think I need to say specifically where, it just inhales air. It could well be that Mr. Snelling is right, that we go, instead of 50%, we go to 45%. It may be that we end up revisiting this every year because the amount of growth that the county is facing warrants that. I don't think that that's an onerous thing to be looking at and being cognizant of that. So I just think, again, holistically, I don't know that we all have come up to a decision, where do we want to put things and how do we want to put things? And so I definitely think there's more information we need prior to, and I don't know that we can get all of that by the 11th.
Yeah. Mr. Zaraf or Mr. Harvey, on map 3A, and I know we're pressed for time, there is a section there that's just to the east of Leland Road that's kind of been carved out, and I know that there are some wetlands down in there. Is that why that was carved out?
I think the intent of that was the issue of the policy of or the guideline of trying to provide more of an equal share of where, the
Okay.
cluster areas would be designated across the county.
Okay, okay. All right, so, yeah, it seems like we've got more work to do on this, perhaps.
Madam Chair, I do think this is, this matter, of course, is before you all now, and it might be easier to do it in more of a work-setting session. And we could probably prepare it in a different kind of way if you had that opportunity, but, I do think we're kind of just in a presentation mode and saying, hey, give us an answer, and we know that's not where you all are, and that wasn't the intent. So I think we probably could come back to the next meeting, schedule a work session,
Okay,
and sit down with the maps and figure out ways that we could make some adjustments based on certain things that we've heard today.
okay.
Although I know that's a
All
little tricky
right,
because staff probably feels like they've done a lot of the criteria work already, but.
Mr. Dudenhofer had a 30-second, the one who has no
Less-
cluster in his
Less of
district.
that. That's what I was going to make sure everybody understand, that my entire district is in the cluster area, and I have no problem with that. So,
Okay.
Just for the record. But I also probably won't participate in deciding this, since it doesn't really affect me. And you guys should thank me, because I take a big part of the 40%.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, Ms. Shelton, last comment, and then we're going
Just
to
one,
move
yeah,
on.
one more thing, Mr. Zaraf. I thought it might be useful, remember that question I had about the 100-acre lot with the one house? There's got to be some way that we can include those kind of opportunities, because those are great locations for those kind of developments.
Well, and that's typically where a development might occur because, one house on 50, 100 acres and the develop around it, or, it's an older house and that gets demolished. So we can look into that and come back with that as well. So,
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, we have a group upstairs, and we have one more item. What is the wish of the board? Could we, well,
Madam Chair, the timeliness of that, which we put in the background report,
right,
also affects the action by the EDA after we finish meeting with them. So the hope is that you all would act so that they can then act after
okay.
dinner.
All right, item number 19, economic development, discuss an incentive agreement for a warehouse facility located in Stafford County, which will be located, this is R18-294. I do want to remind the board that this item is time sensitive. And so do I have a motion and a second to waive our bylaws because this is time sensitive?
Madam Chair, do we make that vote now, or do we wait until we get the presentation?
I would recommend waiting on the presentation.
Okay? All right, Mr. Holden.
Thank you. Is this on? Okay. The EDA has been alerted that we're running late here. They're actually deliberating on this matter now. So we're all in a good place where we can do this and then go to the next meeting as planned. So what I have for you is a brief presentation. I know we're sensitive to time here. The board and public has been briefed on the idea of reducing the merchant capital tax for facilities above 100,000 square feet for the purpose of warehouse distribution centers. Just as a reminder, that was an effort of the Stafford Board of Supervisors to push the General Assembly, who then changed the law that allowed this, that boards like yourselves could change the classification for facilities of this size. And the reason that's important is that that is a targeted sector for Stafford County. Warehouse and distribution, particularly the new version of warehouse and distribution, generally in the e-commerce sector, makes tremendous sense for Stafford County. It'll help us diversify the tax base, and the intent with reclassifying the tax for those size facilities is to attract those larger tenants with a lower tax rate of the merchant capital tax for those size facilities. As presented at both the Community Economic Development Committee as well as public hearing, this kind of project produces quality jobs and potentially is net revenue positive for the county, even though you're reducing that merchant capital tax for those large facilities. The project before you has been percolating along and has been part of this in the background discussion, actually looking forward to the board's decision to date, as well as this agreement. This agreement is for a 485,000 square foot facility designed specifically for e-commerce tenants. Those include, again, companies that will warehouse and distribute products in space above 100,000 square feet. This project itself could have 1 or 2 tenants in this facility. The project financing for this particular project in the tenant terms that the developer is looking at requires that there be no net merchant capital tax for 30 years, which I think was the whole intent of changing the merchant capital tax in the first place. We have set conditions on this agreement that construction will have to start by December 31st of 2019. And this term of 30 years would start at the issuance of the first certificate of occupancy or the lesser of 5 years from full execution of this agreement. What that does is it gives a start date for this agreement, but it also gives a date if nothing happens, it doesn't happen either. Now, I want to emphasize that if the intent of the board was to lower the merchant capital tax to 0 to attract these types of facilities, this project essentially does that for this company. It just guarantees it for their financing in their investors as well as their potential tenants. It is time sensitive because the developer will lose an option on the property at the end of this year. So the bankers are anxious to hear the issuance of this agreement. As I say, it's a catalytic project. It's the first of this size and of this nature in Stafford County. It's a significant private investment. The developer is not seeking any other incentive, and it is in part of our strategic economic plan to focus on these types of centers. It would produce estimated between 100 and 200 new, I would call quality jobs in these types of facilities. It would be net positive tax revenue for the county. And the terms provide security for the county. In other words, if they don't build it by December, if they don't start construction by December 31st of next year, this agreement will not take place. And if they don't act upon it in those 2 terms, certificate of occupancy, and within 5 years, this agreement goes away. So, in other words, I say here, no tenant, no incentive. And it's really not incentive, it's a guarantee of something I think is the intent of the board to lower the merchant capital tax for these types of facilities. And with that, I'll stop. I know there may be questions, and I'm...
Any questions for Mr. Holden? Okay, thank you, Mr. Holden. Okay, I'll bring it back to the board for R 18-294. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we got to move to waive the,
Do you want a motion for that?
yes, please.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to waive the bylaws to vote on an issue that is time-sensitive to the county.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Cast your vote for a time-sensitive matter. Tally the vote. Thank you. That passes unanimously, and now I need a motion for this item.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just wanted to clarify the resolution, the action that you should take is regarding the memorandum of agreement that you have in your add-on folder.
Yes.
And I think the motion can be for consideration for approval of the memorandum of agreement by the Board of Supervisors, by and among the Board of Supervisors, the Economic Development Authority, and Property Management Associates. So it is indeed the paragraph that is at the top of the memorandum of understanding. The resolution in this case won't work in this motion. It would be a reference to this memo agreement. So it's the first paragraph of the memorandum.
Okay. This is in the Hartwood District.
Madam Chairman, I think I'm following the county administrator's guidance here. I make a motion that we enter into a memorandum of agreement on this day by and among Board of Supervisors of Stafford County, Virginia, the governing body of Stafford County, a political subdivision of the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Economic Development Authority of Stafford County, a political subdivision of the Commonwealth Attorney, and Property Management Associates, LLC, a Maryland limited liability company.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes unanimously. We are now recessed till the 7 o'clock meeting. Thank you. Or we're adjourned. Or we're moving upstairs to our meeting with the Economic Development Authority. Thank you. Meeting is called to order. Ms. Shelton is going to give the invocation, and Ms. Maurer is going to lead us in the pledge. If you could please stand.
Bow your heads. Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin our meeting and we talk about the things that are important to Stafford County. Help us engage in meaningful discussion, allow us to grow closer as a group, and nurture the bonds of our community as we go forward together. Fill us with grace as we make the decisions that affect the citizens of Stafford County and ourselves. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Now we'll have presentations by the public. If you would like to comment, please remain courteous and respectful to members of the audience and to the board. If you're here to speak about the one public hearing that we have tonight, please speak during that time period when the public hearing is open. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes. Speak slowly and clearly into the microphone and begin by stating your name and address. Please refer to the light on the podium to monitor your time. Green indicates the start of your remarks. Yellow indicates you have 1 minute to summarize, and red obviously means your time is up. I have no speaker cards tonight. Is there anybody that would like to address the board on any topic?
Paul Waldowski, 8 Pickett Lane, and they put 2 flyers on my mailbox today because they must know that I live at 8 Pickett Lane. So I sent both companies a Virginia no trespass notice warning. Now, I wouldn't have any tonight except I listened to the reports at 3 p.m. after the public speakers. And to clarify, I was talking about the Fairfax County, Virginia sales tax rate. I know all about tax rates. So let's start a debate. because I will argue with any of you about anything. Let's start with acronyms. Do not use them if you do not know what they mean, SAM-IM. They are the key to questions in an interview to determine if a candidate really knows SAM-IM. CPMT is Community Policy and Management Team. CSA is the Children's Services Act. And in FY11, it was $35,351. In FY13, it was $41,610 per child, which was a delta over 4 years of $6,259. So even if I added, $7,500 for, if this is FY18, $70,000 declared today was not an issue because issues don't exist. It's an opportunity. It was just a slight exaggeration. Now, of course, issues exist in California, so if you ever live there, you understand that, because look out, who might be the next Speaker of the House? Wow, new leadership will emerge. All right, so let's also discuss that you haven't been on the board 3 years. It's 2 years and 11 months at the end of the month. And some of you think that you have so much experience over someone who's only been on the board 11 months. In 2015, I campaigned, and my campaign was based on internet. But that was tainted by the Republicans by bringing a 4-time supervisor as an independent when he was Reagan-centric. I know it's National Airport. Now, Falmouth, I can't leave that out, founded in 1728 as a port town, and gerrymandering needs to be reestablished to put it back as a port town. Then maybe we can have a mayor there, and then mayors at Fredericksburg can go out to lunch together. Wow, I'm running out of time. And DSL...
Could you please wrap your comments up?
Yes, I will. DSL is always convenient, always on connection, and is considered a reliable cable internet option. The conductor with FiOS is glass, and glass shatters. Desert Storm 101.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the board this evening? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. We have one public hearing this evening to consider an amendment to the county's comprehensive plan regarding shoreline and stream bank erosion. Mrs. Baker.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Kathy Baker, Department of Planning and Zoning. This item is a comprehensive plan amendment regarding stream bank and shoreline erosion. And this amendment would modify the comprehensive plan chapter 2, the foundation of the future, and it will incorporate background information regarding the county's shoreline areas. It would also create an objective 3.9 and establish several policies regarding prevention and reduction of these erosion issues. Earlier this year, Virginia Department of Environmental Quality conducted a 5-year compliance review of our Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. They determined that we needed additional language in our comp plan referencing how the county addresses these stream bank and erosion problems. The existing comprehensive plan components do address erosion, but these plans are dated. We are looking to incorporate several components of our comprehensive plan relating to the environmental issues into one master environmental plan, but that's going to take probably a multi-year effort because we will need studies and such to do that. So in the meantime, we're planning to add this into the main document. The proposed policies include updating our GIS maps to show shoreline and stream bank conditions and particularly areas of concern. It recommends promoting the use of Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation's Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service, which we refer to as SEAS. And this is a mechanism to provide technical assistance for these erosion problems. I'd also recommend utilizing the Virginia Institute of Marine Science Coastal Resource Management portal to monitor and manage shoreline erosion problems. This is a portal. It's available to many localities throughout the state, and you can go in, use an interactive mapping exercise, and it will help us monitor and maintain those areas of concern. And lastly, the policy will encourage future development projects to mitigate these erosion problems that are identified. Just a little bit of background, our shoreline areas are both tidal and non-tidal. We historically, countywide, have low erosion rates for the shoreline and stream bank areas. Their primary areas of concern are along the Potomac River and the lower reaches of Aquia and Potomac Creeks. And just a note, as many of the studies have determined, that stream bank erosion definitely increases where you have more increased development. In your reports, we included a VIMS shoreline report. It was done back in 2015, and this is something that VIMS took on themselves. They did it for many localities. And basically the result of the report notes that traditional practices of shoreline management, including bulkheads, the more of your hard structures, are not always the best solution. They've come up with suggestions regarding living shorelines as an alternative practice. That includes your marsh plants, your stone and sand fills, breakwaters that you see, such as that up at Quiet Landing, which is one of the county parks. And it also recommends there may be a combination of both practices, both your living shoreline as well as your hard structures, to help with the erosion problems. This was just a sample that came out of that VIMS report. It shows one of the eroding bank lines. I think that meant to say Potomac River on there instead of Aquia Creek. But it shows potential breakwaters that can occur that can be installed along that area of the shoreline to help with those erosion issues and to keep from further erosion. We are recommending approval of these amendments. It provides a framework for future recommendations as we continue to develop our comprehensive plan, and it will bring the county into compliance with the DEQ regulations. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. We did have unanimous support by the Planning Commission at their last meeting in October.
Any questions for Mrs. Baker? Okay, thank you. Okay, at this point in time, I'm going to open the public hearing. If there's anyone that would like to address the board, I'm not going to read it again since we have 3 people that have already heard that. If you would like to address the board, please come forward.
I didn't get to the $7 trillion in the federal one. Wow. Paul Waldowski, 8 Pickett. Well, remember, there are erosion in the Commonwealth. And I'd like to see the 38th Commonwealth Park also be protected. So if there's any erosion type problems there, I'm not familiar with that area, but there must be a shoreline and some kind of stream bank erosion, according to some of the speakers I heard earlier. Now, my favorite part of this is this was adopted on August 16, 2016. Well, that's my birthday, so we know that the comprehensive plan is out of date. I've said that many times. Just another example. But a few weeks ago, we had a car wash approved. That's 1.5 miles exactly from another car wash, and only 50% of the water is recycled. So it's definitely going to cause some kind of erosion steam aspect. So when you're upgrading things, you should consider Commonwealth parks and commercial corridor businesses. Remember, that car wash is in the commercial corridor.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the board? Okay, with that, I'm going to close the public hearing. I'm going to bring this back to the board for proposed resolution R18-198. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve Resolution R18-198.
Have a motion and I have a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none, please cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes unanimously, and at this point in time, I'm going to ask Mr. Snellings to read the board into closed session.
A resolution to authorize closed meeting whereas the board desires to hold a closed meeting for one, consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members regarding the Rock Hill Volunteer Fire Department, which is a specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel. Two, discussion and consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the board. Whereas pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711A1, A3, and A7, such discussions may occur in closed session. So moved.
Have a motion. Is there a second? Have a motion and a second. Any discussion on those two items? Okay, please cast your vote to go into closed session. Tally the vote. The board is now in closed session.
Madam Chair, motion to certify.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? No? Cast your vote. Thank you. Tally the vote. Motion passes unanimously. The meeting is now adjourned.